This week, Raffael Marty from ConnectWise is with us to discuss MSPs and security. Then Jim Routh from, where is he from? We changed this at the last minute. From Reveal Security, joins us to talk about detecting breaches in applications and why every security team needs data science expertise. Finally, in the enterprise security news, Google in the sandbox, Quantum Mania. Wiz raises $300 million, is now too expensive for anyone to buy. MDR firm Deepwatch raises $180 million, tons more funding. Zscaler adopts Canonic at an early stage. Cisco and Trend Micro also make some acquisitions. No Name Security is rumored to be in talks of acquisition, despite how confused the lawyers must be about what is being acquired. Siren files for bankruptcy, the kind you don't come back from, liquidation. The SPACs are unraveling. Even cyber criminals are doing layoffs. There's too much news this week. We really shouldn't skip weeks. Romance scanners, favorite lies exposed, all that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Old Stuff Day. This is episode 307, recorded on Thursday, March 2nd, 2023. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and I think I've done about 100 episodes of these now, but I still mess up the intro sometimes. And joining me is the Master of Marketing, the Mayor of Mayhem, Necromancer of Newsletters, Tyler Shields. How are you, Tyler? Shaver of Beards.
The shaver of beards, yes, I am. And I must say, since today is Old Day and you've done 100 episodes, does that make you the old guy?
You know what's funny about that? Like, I was expecting National Old Stuff Day to be about nostalgia, but it's about throwing out the old stuff and starting new. So I guess I should leave. See ya.
We should just call it a day. Turn it off right here. Call it a day. Gus, fold it. We're done.
Yeah, we got to find some younger bottles. Turn ourselves in. Also joining me is the Czar of Zero Trust, the Captain of Content, the Princess of Predictions, Katie Teitler. How are you, Katie?
Oh, Princess of Predictions. I like that title. Someone once asked me at a job when I was taking a new role. Someone once asked me at a new job when I was taking a new role what I wanted my title to be. And I said, how about Queen? And they laughed. And I said, no, I'd like to be called Queen. That'd be cool. I didn't get that title. No.
I've seen some funny titles. Some companies you can get away with it. They'll let you do it. And some companies not so much. Also joining us is the Baron of Bloodhound, the Pirate King of PowerShell, the Inquisitor of Identity, Sean Metcalf. How are you, Sean?
Inquisitor of Identity. Yeah, I like that. It's almost like the Spanish Inquisition, which no one ever expects. So I'll take that. I'm doing good. I also want to wish my lovely wife a very happy birthday. And spring is coming. So all good things.
Happy birthday. What's your name?
Candace.
Happy birthday, Candace. Speaking of identity. All right, a quick announcement here. Security Weekly listeners, it's that time of year, RSA conference time, so you can save $100 on a full conference pass. RSA conference will take place April 24th through 27th in San Francisco. Really hope you have some hotel rooms or lodging already. If not, get on that. You might want to go the Airbnb route at this point. It will be on demand also, though. So if you're not physically going to go, there is going to be some content that you can get remotely. To register using our discount code, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC 2023 and use the code 53UCyber. That's 53, the letter U, Cyber. We hope to see you there. And I indeed will be there. I don't know how many of our other co-hosts will be there. Any of you?
I will not.
No,
Not this
that's
time
a no.
around.
No, Sean. No, Katie. How about you, Tyler?
They don't let me leave the house ever.
On demand it is. All right. Today's topic is the state of the MSP space. It's hard for me not to say MSSP. I'm so trained to put the extra S in there. But we're excited to have Raffael Marty, General Manager of Cybersecurity at ConnectWise, with us today. And as part of the executive team at ConnectWise, Raffael is responsible for all aspects of the cybersecurity business, has over 25 years of experience in cybersecurity, leading teams at ForcePoint and Sophos. And as a founder, he helped start Pixel Cloud and Loggly. Raffael is also an investor and advisor, and that's the last time I'll call him by his full name from now on. Welcome, Rafi.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you. It's an interesting space. I was just having a chat with somebody about having a guest on the show, and they're asking me, what we were looking for in that guest. And one of the things I think is good to have every now and then is to have somebody who's not fully both feet in InfoSec, has some of that perspective of being both outside and inside, one foot in both worlds. And being in charge of an MSP, security is not the only thing you're worried about. So I think it's always interesting to have the perspective of someone who hasn't drunk too deeply of the Kool-Aid, to put it.
Well, I definitely have drunk some Kool-Aid, right? And maybe what the interesting pieces for me is ConnectWise is really a provider of a platform for MSPs to do their business. So I actually deal with thousands of MSPs on a daily basis. Those are my customers that I get to serve and hear how they're doing. So I have a pretty interesting vantage point from that perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely something we want to delve into today is how that's changed over the years. I mean, clearly, if you drink the Kool-Aid too deeply, you've got people saying security is the most important thing. Like if you don't get security right, it's going to kill your business. And we know that's not true. We know it's important, but it's not, sometimes the FUD, the marketing there gets a little too extreme and exits reality. So, yeah, I think it would be, maybe, just your thoughts on how it's changed over the years. Is security, does it come up in every conversation, or just more than it used to? What's your general take on the temperature today in terms of those conversations and how concerned the MSPs you work with, which maybe we need to get to that first, the structure of ConnectWise, because at first I assumed you guys were an MSP, but you actually make software for MSPs. You serve the MSPs themselves that then serve the customers, correct?
Yeah, so we basically, very quickly, we have sort of three business units. The one is business management services. So these are all the tools that an MSP needs to run their business, from billing and invoicing and quoting products and things like that. We have a unified monitoring business where it's all about remote management, patching, change management, and things like that. And then the security business, right? And with the security business that I'm responsible for, there's products we sell, there's services we sell. We have a SOC of 200 people that monitor the consoles for the MSPs that are then basically delivering the service to their customers, right? So in the end, on the security side, we work with about 6,000 MSPs, and they're protecting somewhere in the 90,000 SMBs out there, right? And that's really the exciting piece here, is we get to scale quite a bit. It's not a few dozen customers that we protect, but we help protect hundreds of, or almost 100,000 of them.
Right. Yeah. Downstream. And that's, I think that's important, for the perspective, we're going to talk about today. I think we might talk from, the end customer perspective a little bit here in terms of, what kind of technology they're needing, what they, how they interact with the MSP, but also a lot from that kind of 10,000 foot view of, when you're building something for a whole bunch of MSPs, how does that change? What kind of trends do we see there? But yeah, SOC of 200 people, that's a big SOC. From all the SOCs I've heard of, I'm sure that's a challenge in itself, right?
Absolutely, and I'm really fortunate to have a fantastic team around me. Right, they have been doing this for quite a long time, and we've been growing just like crazy. There's just so much demand out there, because the problem really starts with the small business, right? They need some kind of protection. Well, they can't go to one of these large security companies and get a service like, look, we don't know what to do. We don't know what products to deploy. We don't know how to manage them. If there are alerts coming up, what are we going to do, right? So they turn to the MSP. Then you have all kinds of MSPs out there, right? There's ones, literally 2 people, they have never heard of security, but they have customers that they want to help secure, and they might sell them other IT services. And as part of that, how do they help them secure all these different things, right? So they turn to us, and we can really literally give them whatever they need. If they want to deliver some of the services themselves, then they can do that. But if they don't have that capability or don't have the resources, then they can turn to us, and we deliver almost the entire service all the way down to the customers. And that's really the benefit that they have a trusted partner in us that they can go to market with.
And how do you do that at scale? Because, maybe it's different at the small business level, and they don't need, the services, the things they need aren't quite as differentiated as when you get into larger companies with different kinds of infrastructure, different kinds of environment. But I assume even at the small business level, like some of them are, 100% office, maybe like a real estate business or a mortgage business. And then some of them are maybe doing manufacturing or something like that. How do you do that at scale, especially with the SOC? Like, do you have to customize to some extent, what you're delivering to each of these clients?
A little bit. The advantage, what we are kind of exploiting, is that there is the MSP sitting in the middle, right? They have the relationship with the customer, and we basically show up almost as an extension of the MSP itself. When we get an alert, for example, we will escalate that to the MSP, and we'll work with them however much they need our help to then make sure that they can remediate the problems for the end customer. So from the service delivery's perspective, there's not that much we have to adjust, because we just have to understand how to work with the MSP. From a threat detection perspective, it's a slightly different story, because there's regional banks, there's manufacturing, right? There's the automotive, there's like kind of the whole gamut of different types of businesses that we have to be able to protect. And I think the advantage that we bring to the table is that we have so many customers in the space with the MSPs that we have a really broad visibility into all kinds of different industries that we can help protect. So we do have a lot of regional banks, right? We have a lot of automotive, we have a lot of pharma, whatever it is in these different areas that we have a pretty good handle on what is actually happening. And maybe also slightly different in the enterprise space. You have much more targeted attacks, whereas in the MSP space, it's almost, that's kind of the industry you're looking at, right? That if the hackers go after an industry, if they go after the MSPs, they generally don't sub-select there and say, oh, MSPs that are delivering to bakeries or something like that, right? They're just like, we're going after the MSP, so we have a little bit of an advantage there.
And at your size, I assume, you're spread out, you've got MSPs in different countries and things like that. Maybe you have some in Europe and you have to worry about GDPR, how in different languages and things like that. How challenging is that from your standpoint? Have you gotten to that point where, the products and services you deliver have to be internationalized and you have to take different regulations into account?
Yeah, we're actually making a bigger effort this year to expand a little more internationally. We have a pretty good presence in Australia, New Zealand, and then in the UK and a little bit of the Nordics in Europe. Mostly English-speaking countries at this point, or at least businesses conducted in English. But the platform itself is internationalized so that we can translate to other languages, which is generally the easier part. But then when you're talking about service delivery, obviously language becomes a problem when you have people on the phone and things like that, right? And that's something we haven't scaled to yet, but it's something that probably during the later part of this year is actually a big initiative that we're running to see how we can expand a little more internationally and penetrate some of these other countries.
And then one more question.
As you can imagine, sorry, but it's like, if you look at a security operations center, to stand up, say, a German subsection or a team that speaks German, you need quite a lot of people to just stand up the bare minimum to deliver these services, right? Because you have 24/7 monitoring, and there's just a certain amount of people that you need, which can get interesting on the expense side, right?
Yeah, definitely. Just wanted to ask one more question, then I'll hand off to some of my co-hosts for them to ask some questions here. But with your background being heavily in the logging area, I remember a lot of the early MSPs and particularly MSSPs that I saw were very much built around a SIM, very, very much built around log data and things like that. We didn't quite have NDRs, and I mean, we had IDS, IPS back then, but there wasn't a whole lot of useful correlation. Now we've got NDR, we've got CSPMs, data coming from the cloud, we've got EDR. How much is that kind of driving? Like, is a lot of your roadmap also thinking about what are the new data sources that we need to include here for the visibility into the MSPs customers?
Yeah, it's if you look at the products and services we're delivering right now, it's very heavy on the EDR MDR side, right? Because it's a great tool to catch a lot of things, right? And if I would recommend one thing, probably install an endpoint protection tool in some way, right? Like lock that endpoint down. It's pretty easy to manage. These things can block, right? And then the other side is our SIM, that we work with a lot of MSPs to say, look, you got to have the endpoint covered, but on the SIM, we help you look at the network and all these other things that are floating around on your network you want to protect as well, right? Because they're often even more exposed than your managed endpoints, and things like robots and Arduinos and all kinds of stuff that are floating around the network are susceptible to be attacked, and you want to understand what they are. So the SIM is a great addition to that. And then in the last probably couple of years, cloud has become a very interesting topic, and it's even more SaaS than it's cloud itself, right? And I'm looking at sort of the SaaS applications everybody's using with the Dropbox and Workday and Salesforce and all that. We're putting more and more data in there, and we need to protect that. The cloud workloads for a subsection of the MSPs is very important. They're running Azure or AWS workloads or GCP that we have to help them protect to some degree. But generally, the MSP is a little more mature in that case, that they understand how to pull the logs out of there and put them into the SIM, and we'll help them with that. But then going forward, I'm constantly trying to understand what is top of the mind for the MSPs to help them, like in terms of where their businesses are going, and then help them secure these components and how to deliver a profitable business or a profitable service for them to the small businesses, right? What other tools do they need in the toolbox? And there's all kinds of different things that keep coming up, like SASE is a topic or Zero Trust Access is a topic that we just jumped into maybe 4 months ago. And it's a new topic for the MSPs. We have to do a lot of education and kind of guide them through. And that education goes beyond just telling them, hey, here's what SASE is and how Zero Trust works. But it's like, how do you make money with this thing, right? And how does it help you protect your customers better? That's always the two conversations that we help them with, which is very, very interesting to work with the MSPs. Again, just deliver security, but also help the MSP have a profitable business.
So I have a question that kind of follows on to that. So we do security assessments for customers across different industries. And one of the things that we've heard them mention is that oftentimes they will just use the EDR as their detection. So not so much a SIM, but the EDR platform and console as this is the thing that helps them understand what's going on in their environment, or if there's something bad that's happening. Others may send some security events, but not everything over to their SIM. And as you said, it gets complicated when you have cloud and these different applications, trying to tie all these together into a meaningful, useful way to understand what is really going on in their environment. So related to that, what are some of the biggest challenges that MSPs help solve for the customers? And I guess, in other words, why MSPs?
Yeah, look, I mean, if you take the bakery down the street, I always use bakeries as the example, right? They have some IT infrastructure. They have a cash register, like a point of sale, right? They have Wi-Fi network. They have a couple of computers where they do their accounting and things like that. They probably don't know much like about IT or security to start with, right? And for them, they already get these services delivered by someone, a technology service provider, right? Where they go to them and they install their wireless and their point of service and so on, or point of sale. If that MSP can now also provide them security, they're like, hey, look, we have an EDR deployed on your endpoint. We monitor the network, so the point of sale is also secured. Now, when something happens, the MSP will look and help understand what's going on. If an alert comes up, right? They will help them now figure out, okay, what do we have to do? Is this a false positive? Do we have to go in and do instant response in the worst case and get you back up and running? So they have a trusted partner for their IT and for their security services, right? That's why the MSP sits there and helps them being able to continue their business, right? That's really what it is, right?
Yeah, and I think there's... Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of value there too, because one of the challenges that we certainly have seen, I mean, Active Directory has been around for 20 years now, and people coming out of college may not even know what Active Directory is or have heard of it. So certainly getting skilled folks that can work on these systems is challenging for all these different organizations that have systems that need to be managed. So managed service providers can kind of plug in those gaps, as you mentioned, where they can focus on their business instead of the core technology. One thing that's interesting to me around that is, are you seeing or hearing that MSPs are, well, it certainly sounds like they are handling more of the security operational tasks than just the strictly operations items that need to be done before, like maybe they were setting up users and getting things configured. Are you seeing and hearing that more of these tasks are security related, where they're implementing security standards, recommendations, maybe even doing remediation from, say, pen test reports and things like that?
It's the whole spectrum, right? We deal with MSPs that have pretty much zero security expertise. They lean on us to help them. They might just resell an EDR, right? And then something happens, our SOC looks at it, helps them figure out what to do. We have an incident response service, so if something really goes bad, we bring the incident response team in. To others that are super advanced, right? They go in, they start with a risk assessment. They run through questionnaires, they run some tools to understand what's happening in the customer base. They build a plan with them. Here's how we get you to a good security that makes sense for whatever industry you're working in, right? And the needs you have, and then provide the services. Often there's some MSPs that are just delivering security services, but what I see most of the time is that they will also provide some of the IT services, right? Like you said, they will manage the Active Directory and do the security around that as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like ConnectWise is kind of the MSP for MSPs, right? Where you're providing a lot of the capabilities that MSPs need, as you mentioned, billing and things like that. Is it effectively a framework that the MSP can leverage in order to enable them to provide these services to customers? Is that basically what you're saying around ConnectWise?
Yeah, it's literally some of our MSPs, they're using a lot of our products. Some are just on the business management side, like the PSA. Some are just security with us. But the biggest benefit for them is really when they start using multiple of our tools. Like I would say most of our security partner base actually has our PSA tool, which helps them with billing and things like that, and ticketing also. And you got to imagine, like, these MSPs, like, if they have that solution, they're literally sitting in front of this ticketing screen day in, day out, right? Their customers are sending tickets in, however, like email or call or whatever. They have their queue that they go through, they work through that. And one of the benefits we provide is that we have this platform that's super integrated. So where if there's an alert going off in the security tool, it will create a ticket in that ticketing system. So the technician doesn't have to jump around, learn multiple tools, look at multiple consoles to keep up to speed of what's going on. but it's all in this one place they can work through. And we're trying to give them more and more capabilities right in that ticket screen to do a lot of their work, right? Because for them, it's every minute spent on clicking around and switching consoles and having to understand what to do is a minute that they can't bill on work, right? So for them, automation is one of the biggest things that we can deliver for them and help them be more profitable, because that's now they have time to do other things and bring in more customers and deliver the services to more customers with the same amount of resources.
Right. So it sounds like automation at scale is a key part of this. And one of the things that we've seen in the industry is that automation or scaling is something that's incredibly useful to operations and something that's necessary for businesses to run. But we've also seen the other side of that, the attackers leveraging that automation, leveraging that scaling, certainly with the SolarWinds issue that happened a few years ago, where attackers are going after the supply chain. Certainly MSPs provide a really ripe target for attackers, from APTs to ransomware to crimeware, what have you, being able to hit a bunch of different targets at once. Maybe even that initial attack or attack component is who are our targets? Like, who did we get back from this? Right. What do you see as MSPs needing to do to best protect their customers or better protect their customers? And how is your company helping to solve this issue and enable them to ensure that there's better identity protection of who the MSP service providers are and which customers they're working with, to make sure that maybe the MSP isn't super overprivileged or have access to all their customers when they maybe just need to be working with a subset?
Yeah. So one of the key pieces for us is that we're not just going out there and like, hey, buy this from us and buy this and buy this and buy this, and we're going to help you sell this to your customers. A big piece for us is education. We have something we call the partner program, where we bring these MSPs in, and literally the first step is that we're working with them to get their own house in order. Because what you just said, we strongly believe you got to be secure yourself first, so that you can then deliver security services to your customers. So we'll help them assess where they stand, put a plan in place to get their security beefed up so that they're more secure, and then they can go out and actually also leverage what they just learned and then bring that to their customers. So that is a crucial piece. In addition, through this partner program also, we are helping the MSPs figuring out what is the right stack, what is the right mix of products and services to bring to their customers. Because and it's kind of scary, because generally the stack is about 10 different products and services that they assemble and then sell out to their customers, right? Because if you were to think about what are the top tools that you need or the top services that you need to secure an SMB, well, there's security awareness training you probably want to put in there somehow, probably kind of like tied in with maybe phishing simulation, right? You want to have something on the endpoint protection. You probably want to do something in the network protection as well. You have your SaaS applications. You probably want to do something on vulnerability management and patching. So the stack gets big quite quickly, but we help the MSPs figure out, okay, what is the right stack? And this is not just our own tools and services, but we're bringing third-party tools in there. We have a whole marketplace and an ecosystem where we pull, say, the email solution in, right? And say, look, here's a good stack you should have for your expertise and for where you are and what you want to do. Then we help them go and sell that to their customers and implement it. So it's that whole life cycle really that we're trying to work with them on.
And I appreciate that. Sorry, I just wanted to jump in real quick, and I appreciate that. Yeah. But I think really the key to what I'm wondering here is, what are some of the things that MSPs could do a better job at, or what are some of the things that they could configure in order to ensure that their customers are protected against these sort of attacks?
Yeah, like I think you can hook in anywhere you want, right? Like as I mentioned earlier, some of these MSPs, they're not the big wizards on understanding Active Directory or whatever other tools that they have deployed with their customers, right? Some of them are they host servers and services for their customers, and it's the same problems that you have across the board, that you make sure that these things are secure, right? So following guidelines, following the CIS benchmarking guidelines is something that we work with these MSPs a lot. Like, hey, here's a framework you can go through. You should really hit all these different things to make sure that you're up to standard on protecting the infrastructure that you're operating, right? And so I think it's probably that's where it starts. Pick the right framework and implement these controls to make sure that you're following some kind of a prescribed way of securing things, right? Like just going in and kind of like, oh, here's a hardening guideline for this, and here's another recommendation for that, and just kind of like doing pieces here and there is not going to get us secure, right? It's just like everywhere else. In a large company, you have a security program. Same here. Implement a security program where you go back to some of these standards and frameworks and implement that for yourself, and then implement that with your customers.
So I have a question for you, Rafi. I think it's pretty obvious that SMBs, the MSPs that provide services to SMBs benefit from a single tool that pulls together as a platform a lot of these separate sub markets, where your larger enterprises can afford to go ahead and buy all these point solutions, cobble them together with glue, with their own security engineering teams, build their own stocks, et cetera, where there's so much more value for an MSP to find a single tool or a smaller subset of tools. When rolling that out to the customer, not the MSP, but when rolling out those types of solutions to the customer, what's the biggest hang-up that you find that the small to mid-sized business struggles with when deploying either a suite of tools or a single tool in the case of your company?
Well, that's a good question. I think one of the challenges we see every now and then is that, okay, say take EDR, right, endpoint protection. It's easy to have here's a binary that you have to install on every machine. But how do you actually do that, right? With the detail of, okay, you got to get to every machine, you have to deploy it, make sure it's running, keep it up and running. It actually takes time, right? That if you have a company of 100 people to get that rolled out. Now, hopefully the MSP has some kind of a software management tool installed so they can push these things down, right? But often they will lack that. And so while the goal might sound very simple, deploy endpoint protection on all the machines you can, to actually implement that, the project to do that is often pretty complex and takes quite a while to make sure you actually have the coverage, and then you want to monitor and make sure that these things actually stay up to date. And that's all these different areas where we see these challenges where there's a lot of manual work potentially involved, is where we obviously then see opportunity to come in and help with certain tools. In some cases we have them, in some cases like, oh my God, we got to put this on the roadmap and develop some kind of these things.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I've definitely found that the end consumer struggles with different things like lack of resources, like as you mentioned, right? What's interesting to me, though, is that so many companies sell to MSPs and then leave it to the MSP to figure out how to best serve the end consumer of the product, in this case, the SMB. And what I'm imagining and hearing is that folks like yourselves and the leaders in these areas have education, have professional services, have ways of helping the MSP to deliver that value appropriately to the end buyer. And really, at the end of the day, what we need is the end buyer to say, hey, I struggle with X. Help me figure out X, right? And it sounds like it's generally a lack of resources scale problem that most small to mid-sized businesses will struggle with.
100%. And our partner program is, we spend a lot of resources and efforts in developing it and expanding it, and it costs us quite a bit of money, but in the end that's also where we make a lot of money back, because if the MSPs are successful, they will sell more. Well, they will sell more of our stuff, right? And that has worked really well for us. And I don't think you cannot really sell to the MSP space if you don't have a component of education, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I had some kind of follow-up questions. Again, we've talked a lot about the tech stack and how you decide what that tech stack is going to be, but I'm kind of curious about the kinds of conversations you have with customers? Are most just happy to let you, well, and when I say customers, talking about your customers and your customers' customers, are most of them pretty hands-off, happy to let you be the expert on here's what you need, here's how it should work, we'll operate this stuff for you? Or, I'm sure in some cases the MSPs are a bit more hands-on with configuration and operation of some of that stuff. But do you also have conversations where, like, I assume that's some of it, but do you also have conversations where you get pushback, where people are like, why don't you have this? I saw an article about this new shiny thing, when are you adding that to the stack? And you have to push back and say, actually, we don't think there's a lot of value in that. Basically you have to tell them no nicely. Is that a common conversation? Yeah. or is that rare, where you have to kind of push back and say, yeah, no, it's not worth the squeeze on that one?
Hey, all the time. And that's what I'm seeking out as well, right? Because we all have our blinders on when we're doing things, right? I have mine on. I see a certain segment of my partner base that we work with all the time, but I can't ever talk to all 6,000 of them, right? And they have different needs. So I'm relying on them coming and saying, hey, we need a way to help. Like, we need to be able to monitor Azure Active Directory or Azure this and that, or how do we monitor our Amazon instances from a network perspective, right? Like, we get into the weeds of some of these things fairly quickly and quite often, and I'm relying on my MSPs to push back and ask and challenge, right? Because only that way can we make sure that we deliver the right services to help them grow their business. In the end, they're my customer. They're dictating where things are going, right? If there's new technology coming up that they're starting to having to support, well, we have to help them secure it, right? It's just like everywhere else as well. If there and like one of the other big examples is regulation, right? There's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of education needed on, well, what are the things you have to deliver for XYZ regulation? What frameworks should we use to address these things? And then you get scares again when the government puts out some kind of executive order that says, here's what MSPs need to do, or certain guidelines, right? So that there's constant conversation happening with the MSPs.
Yeah. How much of a heart attack did you have when the White House said zero trust?
Fortunately, we have a zero trust solution in our stack, so I can just say, go there, right? Which obviously doesn't just solve all the problems, but it's some of these things help, just having the conversation and keeps us re-engaged with our partner base. They're like, hey, we just saw this. What does this mean? How can you help us make sense of this stuff, right? So we're trying to be their advisor on these kinds of things as well.
And then my next question is kind of around, obviously the goal is to make everybody secure all the time to prevent breaches. But when you get to the scale that you're at with the number of customers that you have and the customers that those companies have, breaches are going to be inevitable. So I'm kind of curious, like, how you have that conversation around that sensitive topic. Like, I imagine attackers are now thinking, hey, if I can target and attack an MSP instead of attacking individual customers, if I can compromise an entire MSP, then that's a lot more folks I can ransom. I can really benefit from scale on the attack side there. So is that a conversation that you have, like, when you onboard MSPs? You say, hey, if something happens, here's how we're going to handle it. Is there a playbook for that? I know it's maybe a sensitive topic, but I've got to imagine it's inevitable once you get to a certain scale.
You're painting a target on my back right now, whatever I'm going to say. It's a great question. When we onboard a new customer for an MSP even, or just an MSP, we obviously have the conversation on our service level objectives, right? Like, what are we escalating? What are the things you want to hear from us? So we sit down, we define, here's the alerts. Here's how we set up your EDR. Here's how we set up the SIM. Here's the things we're monitoring. Here's what we escalate to you. And then you get into the agreement of what we deliver versus what the MSP then is responsible for to then go and investigate further. There's only a certain amount of things we can do. So if you are a SIM customer of ours, then, well, I can only do whatever I see in my data. We are not going to log into systems and go pull more evidence and things like that. That we draw the line there, right? Because that would open us to certain other challenges that we don't want to cross that line. But we can have the SLA with the MSP say, hey, you got to look at the systems. Here's what we need you to look for. Go do this now. And then in certain cases when we're like, hey, you got a breach right now, here you got to go and act. We have an incident response service where they can say, we need help, bring the cavalry, and we come in and help remediate the problems, right? So there's constant conversations, and what we need to do is we need to make sure that we are adhering to the SLO that we set up with the MSP, and we constantly make sure that we're on top of that. We're tuning our systems, and that's the delivery that we do on a daily basis, right?
Yeah, and I the reason I asked the question, I don't want to paint a target on your back, but I think it's unhealthy and kind of naive to have this, this assumption that, I've outsourced my responsibility and my risk to this other company, and I like that you frame it, the way you have that conversation is as, shared responsibility, much like the cloud service providers do. I think most people are familiar with that, the shared responsibility model, the fact that there's some things they can do for you and, other things that they just can't, there's limitations there. I think,
I probably didn't answer the piece that people are always interested in, which is the scale, right? Like you asked, well, are the attackers going after the MSP and compromise their infrastructure? Now they have access to all their customers. Well, imagine it's just like a large organization, right? The MSP probably even has less endpoints in the end than, say, a JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs or someone like that, right? So you could obviously attack the AD of the MSP that they might be using for a lot of their customers, but often AD is even segregated for most of their customers. They have an individual AD instance. So the scale you're going to get to is actually not that much bigger than if you're going after one of the big ones directly, right? So I'm not sure if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's just it's something we have to get out there. It's something everybody's thinking about, right? Like especially after a couple of these high, very visible incidents have happened. So it's obviously a discussion you have to have. And I think it's better for us to get it out there than to pretend, I've hired a company to do all that stuff for me and I don't have to worry about it. And I think it's interesting that happens at two levels here. Not only the small business, but the MSP itself, to some extent, they can't totally sleep on their responsibility when it comes down to securing their own stuff.
Yeah.
Even though they've got your tech stack and that's great, but still, they've got to make sure they do their part.
Right. Absolutely.
Awesome. And with that, Rafi, I think that's a great place to end. I thank you so much for this conversation, for all the answers here. I think we've learned a lot about how this works and and some of the current trends. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk about detecting breaches in applications and why every security team needs data science with Jim Routh.